My name is Ashlyn, and welcome back to Medicated and Motivated. If you do not know me, my name is Ashlyn. I am a full-time paramedic, and this is my show, Medicated and Motivated, where I tell you guys about the real and raw lifestyle of what it's like being an EMS provider, whether it's the good, the bad, or the ugly. Today, I want to talk about a little bit of the good, but everything good has to come with some ugly as well. I'm going to be telling the story of the first time I ever advocated for a patient. Just to get everything out of the way first, I do want to tell you guys that you can follow me on all of my other socials, whether it's TikTok or Instagram. They're both in the description notes. And I have never said this on the podcast before, but I am affiliated with Workman Trading Co. I have a coupon code with them. If you don't know what Workman Trading Co. is, they are a website that creates apparel for all blue collar and trade jobs, including first response. I've been affiliate with them for a couple months now, and you can use my code Ashlyn at checkout for a little bit of a discount. They have such great quality and amazing designs on all of their apparel, and they have been working so hard and diligently to create new designs for the upcoming seasons. I will put a few of the designs here on the screen just as examples. I love their stuff. The shirt I'm currently wearing today is the licensed drug dealer shirt, and it is one of the shirts that I get the most compliments on, and I think it's one of their best sellers as well. You can go find their hoodies, their t-shirts, their long sleeves, hats, decals, everything you want on their website, workmantradingco.com. I remember this story taking place, I believe, late 2021, early 2022, and I was a brand spanking new paramedic. Got my license in August of 2021. I was still in that young pup. I don't know the area. I'm getting used to the service still because it was a brand new job, brand new partner, didn't know her very well yet. And we are getting toned on a weekend to an event center for a female having head and neck pain requested by law enforcement. So we're going to an event center that is in the middle of town. So we initially thought, okay, this stemmed from like a noise complaint call because PD is requesting us, right? Well, we get there, and PD has like this worried look on their face. They're like freaking out. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? So I get out of my truck, and the patient is sitting inside a car, like on the passenger side. And there's like people like holding her up. Like she's like physically kind of falling over. Like you can see her eyes fluttering, and they're like trying to hold her sitting up in a position. I'm like, whoa, okay. This escalated. I thought we were here for head and neck pain. So law enforcement continues to tell me that patient was sitting inside the event center. They were celebrating a wedding, and she got this sudden onset of head and neck pain, nausea, and vomiting. So my first initial thought is, well, we're at a wedding. Was there any alcohol or any other sort of substances on board? And the patient and all of the bystanders are very insistent on no, this is a dry wedding. We don't do any of that stuff. And I'm like, okay, it's just a question I have to ask. And then my thought went to, okay, well, people tend to get food poisoning. So what did they eat? What was served? Is this a possibility? And they're like, no one else is sick, and she's barely eaten anything today. So I finally start talking to the patient, and she's kind of like sitting there, like just fluttering her eyes, like trying to stay awake. She's very alert and oriented when she is awake, and she just keeps saying, my head hurts. My head hurts. It's all over my head. It's the worst pain I've ever felt. And she just feels like she can't move. There's a gnat flying around in my office, and I've been trying to kill it about 10 minutes before. The patient had vomited about 2 to 3 times prior to EMS arrival, and she had just kept dry heaving while I was there. And when we tried to get her out of the car, she was like jello legs. Like she could not stand up without assistance. She just, I can't do it. There's no strength in me. And I was like, okay, that's all right. So we get my patient onto the cot. We secure her in a position of comfort. And immediately she just balls herself up into the fetal position. She is clutching her head. And when I say clutching her head, I mean clutching. Like I can see her squeezing her head. As soon as we get in the truck, ambulances have fluorescent lights. She immediately said the lights are bothering her. They're too painful. They're too bright. So I ended up having to turn basically all the lights off for the entire ride of the transport to the hospital. And it was like 9:30 at night. So made my job a little difficult, but it's okay. I didn't want my patient in pain. So I start going through my assessment questions, and I am like, did you fall? Were you dancing? Did you move something weird? Did you move your head weird? Did you pop your neck weird? I'm trying to think of every single question I can possibly think of for this crazy head pain. And she's like, no, I was sitting at a table, I was watching everyone dance, and all of a sudden, my entire head starts throbbing. I was like, okay, all right. So I start an IV on her, I get her some fluids going, I get her some Zofran. I remember her vitals being pretty much fine. Her blood pressure was a little elevated, but when you're in pain, your blood pressure is going to be a little high. I asked her what her normal blood pressure was, and she said, well, it's a little higher than that, or a little lower than that, but nothing crazy. So throughout this time, I feel like this is where people are going to get bias with patients. And a lot of times I feel like first responders, including myself, we fall into the, are these people faking it? Are they drug seeking? Because so oftentimes paramedics, EMTs, EMS, healthcare in general, we come across those people that do drug seek. And it's a very sad thing because not only are we using resources that could be used on someone having an actual emergency, but EMS cannot walk into a call with a bias like that. We treat everyone with an open mind, or at least I try to treat everyone with an open mind. I know a lot of other responders do as well. A great example of this is actually a month ago, I got a call for a female in extreme abdominal pain. And I've had several instances with females in extreme abdominal pain. I take them seriously. Female anatomy, there's way too much that can be going on. And about 9 times out of 10, there was something going on. So I gave this lady pain meds, and we get to the hospital, and then she ends up leaving AMA. And it kind of opened my eyes to, this kind of sucks. It's a pandemic that goes on within EMS, especially, and in ERs. But this lady specifically, when I was talking to her, she never moved from inside this ball that she had put herself in. She is literally curled up, fetal position, clutching her head. And when I say clutching, I don't mean just like grabbing her head. I mean, I could see her fingernails digging into her head. Like, this woman is in obvious pain. She has tears streaming down her face. She is trying to talk to me in such a clear voice, answer all my questions. Such a kind lady. I gave her mad props because I could not imagine how annoying it would be to be in that much pain and have this person asking you, 100 questions. But she was very gracious, and she understood exactly what was going on. Like, I needed to figure out and see if I could. So I'm sitting there, I'm trying not to fall into that bias. I ended up giving her pain meds, and then it finally hits me. She could be having a thunderclap headache. And one of the causes of a thunderclap headache is an aneurysm. And my ears perk up, my, all red flags in my brain immediately start waving, and I'm on high alert now. I was like, oh no, this could be bad. So I'm reassessing her, and I'm reassessing her, and I'm reassessing her. It's about a 30-minute drive to the hospital. I think in total I ended up giving her 150 of fentanyl. It was not touching her whatsoever. She was moaning and groaning in pain. She is continuously clutching that head. She's staying awake. She's still talking and answering questions to me, but it's becoming less frequent just because she's sitting there just groaning in pain. Okay. So I give my report to the hospital. Like I said, 30-minute transport. Gave my radio report about probably 10 to 15 minutes away. It's a level 2 trauma center. It's the closest and nearest facility that we could possibly transport to. Nearest level 1s are hour and a half, 2 hours away. Give reports to the hospital. I want to say right after my radio report is when I gave my third and final dose of fentanyl. I gave them in 50 microgram increments, and still just was not touching her. She almost is getting worse. Her blood pressure's going up a little bit. Her heart rate's kind of going up a little bit. She's in pain. And at this point, the whole bias of, is she drug seeking? No, not even a question anymore. Not a thought in my head. I wasn't really playing into the bias anyway, but now I'm really not playing into the bias. We get to the hospital. I pull her out of the truck. And this is when I notice she's getting a little bit more lethargic. When I say lethargic, I mean she's not moaning near as loud. She is awake, but you kind of have to, ma'am, hey, ma'am. I'm here. I'm here. So I'm like, all right, we're starting to have a change in mentation. We just took a turn. I don't like the turn. We're going inside. So I go to the charge nurse desk and I was like, hey, where do you want me to go? And she said triage. Now, I want to give everyone the perspective of this is 2021, end of 2021. Triage was not an unpopular place to go, and it's still not an unpopular place to go. I still take patients to triage pretty much on the regular, but I feel like 2021 was really still all the repercussions of you come to the hospital for anything, you're going to triage. We had the low staffing, we had the influx of patients. It's winter. So not only are we still dealing with COVID patients, people get sick in the winter no matter what. So triage, let's just say, I was not surprised to take patients to triage my entire first year as a paramedic. But this one, I looked at her and I was like, ma'am, there's been a change in mentation. She's starting to get much more lethargic and that pain is getting worse. I don't think she's triage appropriate anymore. And she said, okay, somebody will evaluate her in triage and then we'll make the decision there. She was a very, very nice charge nurse. I don't fault her for any of this. So I said, all right, we go out to triage. I don't know how if most people's triages are set up this way, but this is how ours is set up. We have like double doors and then you go through the double doors. Here's the waiting room. And then there's the glass, cubicle type thing. This is where registration is. Behind registration, inside that cubicle, is the triage nurse where they do all the assessment and stuff and they check patients in. You have to take them through a separate door to go to the triage nurse. All right. So we go through the double doors to the wheelchairs and my partner gets a wheelchair. At this point, my patient is a rag doll. She is fully limp at this point. She cannot hold up her own body weight at all. She can't even hold up her own head. She is still alert, basically verbal stimuli at this point. I kind of had to, ma'am, hey, ma'am, I'm awake. I'm like, we're getting worse. We're getting worse. Perfect. This is great. Fantastic. All right. My partner and I are trying to get her into this wheelchair and she is no help. And it is not like oh my gosh, she's not helping. No, she physically could not help us. Homegirl can't hold her head up. What makes us think that she's going to hold her whole body weight up? Okay. So I look through the triage window and I look at registration and I look at the nurse and I say, can someone help us? Triage nurse walks out and in the least condescending way, this is how she talked to us. What's going on? So I give her a brief summary. I said, this patient's here for a headache. However, her patient is deteriorating. She's becoming pretty lethargic and she is unable to even hold her own head up anymore. And she said, okay, get her in the wheelchair. We'll assess her. And then walks straight back into triage. Does not help me and my partner whatsoever. So we end up getting her in the wheelchair. I wheel her over to the registration desk and the registration's trying to ask her, like name, birthday, address, what are we here for? All the check-in stereotype questions, right? When I say my patient literally can't hold her head up, she's like sitting like this on the triage desk and her purse, I had like looped it around her arm so it didn't fall off her lap. And she's like trying to reach her hand into the purse, but her hand is just like, here, this is what her hand is doing. She's just like it can't even grab stuff anymore. Like she has no strength. So I end up handing registration my iPad, which had all the information on it. And I take the patient back to the nurse for assessment. And the nurse starts berating me about how I was breaking HIPAA by giving a patient report in a public area, i.e. the waiting room. And mind you, I didn't give a report. I gave a chief complaint and I said, her condition is deteriorating. Like she's not triage appropriate anymore. That's all. Breaking HIPAA means I gave an identifiable, detail that would identify a patient. Now, I was saying the chief complaint. I didn't give anything else. And she just goes on and on about how I should never do that again. That was so unprofessional, berating me. Patient is sitting right next to me. And I'm like, okay. So then I start giving my report. I say what we got called to, how she presented, what I did. I gave 150 fentanyl, 50 microgram increments, and the last dose was given at this time. When we arrived at the hospital, her mentation started to change drastically. And she's looking at me. Okay, that's all. Okay. And I like expressed to her at the end of my report, I'm like, I do not think she's triage appropriate anymore. I actually think she needs to go straight to CT, is what I'm thinking. And all I get told was, okay. Mind you, there's no physician or anyone out there. There's no PA, there's no NP, there's nobody. It's just the triage nurse. And I'm like, so are there any rooms available? Like, I'm actively trying. I don't want to leave this patient in triage. Like, we'll figure it out after we assess her. And I was like, I will help her back into a room if you need to. Like, I don't think she needs to be sitting out in triage. And then she starts getting really aggravated with me. Forcibly gives my iPad back because I'd handed it to her for her to sign it. And she's like, we will handle it. Okay. All right. So I teeter-totter my way back to the charge nurse desk. And I was like, ma'am, I really don't think she belongs in triage. Like, she is getting worse. I think this is going on. I think she needs to go to CT at minimum. She said, okay, the nurse will assess her. We hear your concerns. And I was like, but that nurse didn't, obviously. So I didn't say that. So I get back in my truck. And when I tell you, I start rampaging. I'm furious. This is the first time that I had ever really stuck up for a patient. And I get it. I would have been a new medic. Like, if this happened in, like, say, I think November, December of 2021, I'd only been a medic 4 to 5 months. But still, like, this is the first time that I had really stood up to a patient or for a patient. And I was so aggravated. I was like, man, like, she could have a brain aneurysm. What if that thing blows and then she dies? And I tried to help her. I couldn't do anything. I did everything I could. I was rampaging. I was so furious that this woman was not getting the help. But then I kind of shifted gears. I was like, well, maybe what if I was reacting? What if I was being erratic? What if she doesn't have a brain aneurysm? What if it's just like a really bad migraine? And then I started questioning like all my assessment, everything that I had found clinically. And I mean, this is pretty normal, especially when you're a new provider. You start doubting yourself. But then I was really doubting myself. I was like, well, maybe I am just being overdramatic. Maybe I am just overthinking symptoms. Like, when you're fresh out of school, you think everyone's going to die. Because in school, you are taught, you know, all the big, bad, scary things. The things that will kill your patients immediately. And when I clicked in my head that thunderclap headache, she could have a brain aneurysm going on, it stuck. I was done. I was like, oh my gosh, this could be happening. My patient could die. I need to help her. So let's just say I was very uneasy. And the thing about EMS is sometimes we sit with that uneasiness and we don't have a choice because we don't get patient updates all the time. We drop them off and then we may never know what happens to those patients. Sometimes if it's like a big case, so one of the hospitals that I transport to will give us STEMI reports and cardiac arrest reports, and basically just gives us a summary of what happened after we transported them to the hospital. It's for, you know, continuing education and what we can learn from them. It's a very, very nice thing. But some other cases we don't get those. And it's really frustrating on those patients where I was like, I really don't know what was going on, but I really like to know. And honestly, at this point, I just wanted to know if my patient was alive. If she truly had a brain aneurysm that was gonna bust, I wanted to know if she made it out okay. But at that point, you know, I didn't really know. So I want to say about 6 months later. I don't remember exactly when this happened, but I do remember it was a long time later. I'm sitting at my station. The phone starts ringing. Like, we all have station phones everywhere. And it starts ringing. I say, hey, this is so-and-so service. This is Ashlyn. How can I help you? And it's this woman. She starts saying she has a billing question. and she hasn't received a bill in the mail yet, and she was wondering if there was an error or if she missed it. She doesn't want to be late on payments, stuff like that. So I said, oh, okay, well, the billing guy is actually out of office. I want to say it was like a weekend or something. But I'll take your name, your number, and do you know like when you rode in the ambulance to give us a better timeline? And she starts talking, and I'm writing down all her information. And she said, well, I thought it was just weird. I received the helicopter bill, but I didn't receive your guys's. And I was like, helicopter bill? Are you okay? And she's like, oh, yeah. I was flown from So Hospital after being transported to this hospital. She names a level 1 trauma center. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, then it clicked in my head. The date she gave me, and then what she was describing, then the hospital. I said, ma'am, were you transported for a headache? And she said, yeah, I was. I ended up having a brain aneurysm. And I was flown to this level 1 trauma center. And I very calmly said, ma'am, I was the paramedic that took you. And I could hear her in the call. I'm going to get emotional talking about this because all she said was, I don't remember much of that night, but I remember your voice. And that, oh my God, my eyes are tearing up. That hit me so hard. Because number one, I'm talking to the patient that I had no idea what the outcome was. I had no idea if she was alive. I had no idea if I was being dramatic over her symptoms and overthinking them, or if this poor lady ever got treatment. And I'm sitting here talking to her, and my gut feeling about her symptoms was correct, and she's okay. It hit me like a wave, and you could tell her voice, it hit her too, that she was talking to the provider that tried so hard that night to get her help. And she basically described to me that she sat in triage for a while. They finally wheeled her to CT. From CT, she was taken straight to the trauma room. And within 25 minutes, a helicopter had landed and she was flown to the nearest level 1 trauma center. She, straight from CT to a trauma room to a helicopter for a brain aneurysm. It was like this wave of assurance over my body. You know, as a new provider, you're going to question your symptomology. You're going to question like, is this really going on? Because like I said, in medical school, you get taught all the big, bad, scary things. You get taught these things are going to kill your patients the quickest, and this is the symptoms, and this is what you need to recognize. When they actually start happening, it is like this whole wave of, is this really real? Hit you. And the fact that this wave was real, it was this wave of assurance that I needed, not only as a new paramedic, but everyone knows I had a really bad experience my first year as a medic. I was roughhoused horribly in the EMS culture. And this was the assurance that I needed to build my confidence as a patient care provider. And it felt amazing to know that this patient was alive and that she received treatment that she needed. So, everyone, we can breathe. My patient was good, and my assessment was correct. All right, let's take a moment. Let's take a moment and let's briefly talk about the thunderclap. And it is an ominous sign for a brain bleed, brain aneurysm, hemorrhagic stroke, a bunch of scary symptoms. So the source I'm reading from is from the Cleveland Clinic. It was last updated in 2022, so not horribly old of statistics, but the thunderclap headache is a rare type of headache that is extremely painful and comes on suddenly. It can be a side of blood vessel issues or bleeding in your brain. Because of this, a thunderclap headache requires immediate attention. This reminds me of like the Google searches that someone does, and it tells them, seek medical attention. You could be dying. Like, don't Google your symptoms is basically what I'm trying to say. But overview, like I said, it's a sudden onset of an extremely painful headache that is like a clap of thunder because it strikes without any warning. And sometimes, in the rare cases, patients will actually hear a loud clap as well. That's why it's called thunderclap. It's a very rare headache. It happens in less than 50 of 100,000 adults each year. But it's very important to seek medical attention immediately to rule out life-threatening causes. So the main symptoms of thunderclap headache is obviously that severe onset of head pain, but it also has numbness, weakness, vomiting or nausea, sometimes seizures, change in vision or light sensitivity, confusion, speech problems. There's actually two types of thunderclap headaches. The primary, which is sometimes just like a really, really bad migraine and there's no underlying cause of the pain. Sucks. People that live with chronic migraines, I pray over them so often because I could not imagine. I know sometimes they can get so debilitating. But secondary thunderclap headaches are the ones that are underlying for a more ominous condition, such as brain aneurysms. A brain aneurysm is a bulging or weak area of the blood vessel in or around your brain. So I want you to think of it like a hose. Shadow is making his appearance. Hey, baby. I don't know if you can see him. Let's look at the monitor. Hi, Shadow. Hi, baby. He has been so good this whole podcast. I've been in here for like an hour and a half, and now I think he's getting bored. He's like, so the way to think of an aneurysm, the most popular type of explanation is like a hose, a garden hose. When that wall of the hose starts getting weak, there might be a bubble in it. And eventually that bubble's going to burst as the wall gets thicker and thicker and thicker of the hose. Water sprays everywhere because now you have a hole in your hose. Imagine that, but a blood vessel inside your brain. A brain aneurysm, also called a cerebral aneurysm, is a bulge in a weak area of an artery in or around your brain. The constant pressure of blood flow pushes around the weakened section outward, creating a bump or a bulge. As blood rushes into this bulge, the aneurysm stretches farther and farther and farther, similar to how a balloon gets thinner the more it fills with air. A brain aneurysm can occur anywhere in your brain, but most of them form in the major arteries along the base of your skull, and approximately 10 to 30% of people who have a brain aneurysm will have multiple. The majority of brain aneurysms are small and don't cause symptoms, but an aneurysm can cause symptoms if it puts pressure on a nearby nerve or brain tissue. If they leak or rupture, it can cause bleeding in the brain, and that can be life-threatening, causing medical treatment to be required. As the time passes with a ruptured aneurysm, the likelihood of death or disability increases. So what happens really when it ruptures? So let's think about the anatomy of your brain inside the skull for a quick second, okay? So you have the skull, which is, your noggin. Then you have your brain. In between those two, you have space. And you have, I'm going to read these off in order, the dura mater, then you have the subdural space, arachnoid matter, and then the subarachnoid matter, pia matter, and then you start having like your actual brain tissue. Those matters and that space is pretty thin, but it provides enough cushion between the brain and the skull. It's not a lot of space though. That's the key thing I want to make. So when you have something like bleeding on the brain or even a hematoma to the brain, it can be deadly because now it's going into that space and it's causing pressure, actually pushing the brain. Not good is what I'm trying to say. So you can have up to 90% of one of the conditions that you can have with a brain aneurysm is called a subarachnoid hemorrhage. So you have the subdural space, then you have the arachnoid space. So you have the subarachnoid, which basically means it's just in the middle of that. And it's about 90% of these subarachnoid hemorrhages are caused by ruptured brain aneurysms. You can also have a hemorrhagic stroke. I'm having a stroke. So hemorrhagic stroke, which is bleeding between your brain and the skull. So you actually have blood that is pressing against the skull and the tissues surrounding the brain. So some of the symptoms of a ruptured brain aneurysm: thunderclap headache. Yeah. Nausea, vomiting, stiff neck, blurred or double vision, sensitivity to light, seizures, a drooping eyelid or dilated pupil, pain above or around the eye, which she had both. She had light sensitivity and she had pain, confusion, weakness or numbness, which she was definitely weak, and loss of consciousness. My patient was getting more lethargic as the time went on. All right. So my patient ended up having a ruptured aneurysm. Kind of crazy. And that is why I will always continue to have this story in my brain and tell people the story of how important patient advocacy is. Because even if you're wrong, I would rather be wrong about a patient's symptoms and speak up about it rather than have that just gut feeling and never say a word. Because here's the thing, you may be thinking something. You may, it couldn't be this, it couldn't be this. But like, say you say something to the nurse and they're like, oh, all right, I would have never thought of that. And then it ends up being that. You truly never know. And EMS has kind of the benefit of the doubt. We see a lot of things that most healthcare providers won't. We're on scene with the patient. We're the first person to lay eyes on the patient. We have a great advantage to so much assessment and so much background that the doctors, the nurses, they will never have. We are a great resource to those healthcare providers for our patient. I highly, highly recommend always say those gut feelings. Even if you're scared, even if it's a very intimidating and mean triage nurse that you still have problems with to this day. Trust me, I do. I've met this nurse on many occasions now. Even if you don't want to confront, you're a non-confrontational person, think about that patient. Think about that patient and the benefit that you could give them in their patient care. It's going to be worth it. But that is all I have for this episode. This is one of my absolute favorite patient story times that I have. It's one of my first big patients that I had as a new paramedic, and it is the one that I think made the most impact on me so early on in my career. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Like I said, follow me on all my other social medias, TikTok, Instagram. I'm the most active probably on Instagram when it comes to live updates on this podcast or just me in general. I like talking to people on there. I like having fun. And TikTok, I try to post daily on there as well. Everything is going to be in the description boxes below. Hit the bell icons on YouTube and Spotify both so you're notified whenever I post. I try to post every single Monday. And that's going to be it. As always, have a good shift.